I feel like the best answer I can give for this is, kind of. At age 15, my mother almost murdered me. She was super drunk, and while I expected her to just routinely beat me, she had been getting drunk and abusing me my entire life. I was in for a rude awakening. I just saw the end. That maybe that gray-haired guy on America's Most Wanted, didn't know John Walsh's name at the time, was going to talk about the murder of me, this 15-year-old girl, by her alcoholic mother, and that I'd have a funeral and so few people would attend. Though, what vividly did flash before my eyes was all of the abuse. And it came down to the cold metal at my throat. I was ready to die. I didn't, but sometimes I wish my mother had done me in. I'm in my 20s now, and I've realized both my parents are pieces of garbage and narcissists, and I'm probably better off without them. Despite the big butt package of PTSD and trauma I now carry with me, edit. Thank you for the silver. From my grandfather. He has heart issues and had an internal defibrillator fitted to help his heart beat normally, to test if they stopped his heart while he was awake. But he kept talking to the doctors about the weather and normal old man stuff. When his heart restarted, he felt a little shock and asked, "What was that?" "I was enjoying myself," the doctor replied. "Welcome back to life," the doctor told him afterwards. That he should have just stopped being awake and fallen unconscious. And thus was the only time anything like this had ever happened to one of his patients. Stubborn old man. My heart stopped when I was in the ER for 34 seconds. Not really a life flash, but a very calming feeling of, as I describe it. What was I even worried about? Everything is going to be fine. I had a near-death experience when I was about 5. I was drowning in a pool. I probably didn't have enough memories at that point for anything to flash before my eyes. And I was also very focused on trying to get my head above the water again. I remember looking up at the sky through the water, that the surface started to look geometric, like tessellations. Then I experienced some sort of depersonalization. I had a distinct feeling that I was outside of my body. And I watched what happened next. My mom saving me from a distance. No life flash. It felt just like falling asleep when you're exhausted. I was hit by a car 3 years ago. 11th of February 16th. I was walking across the road with one of my friends, and they crossed the road and I waited a few seconds and then crossed, but I was very short at the time and couldn't see the car coming. I remember seeing the car coming on the right-hand side on me, and the next thing I remember is being hit from the right side and flying through the air and landing with a thud on the side of the road, and then hearing the tires screech. Luckily, the only injury I sustained was a compound fracture to both the bones in my right leg, meaning the bones snapped completely in half and came out of my leg, and as they snapped and came out of the skin, it snapped the artery in the leg and all the nerves. I went into shock from the injury, so I couldn't feel any pain besides the burning from the hot road. Australian summer weather. And #X200B. I looked down at my leg and noticed the blood coming from my sock pouring all over the road, and my leg bent in half, and thought, well, it's broken all right. Then I just remember being surrounded by people, and I called my mom, and since I was in shock, I wasn't distressed or crying, and I called my mom and told her I was hit by a car, and she didn't believe me because I was so calm. She thought I was kidding. I lost a lot of blood at this stage and had a seizure and passed out, but I didn't think it was serious, and I kept trying to move and get up only to be held down by bystanders. I remember this white ring in my vision, and it kept getting bigger and bigger, blocking my eyesight. It started from the edge of my sight, closing in. Like everyone else seems to be saying, I don't remember any live flashing before my eyes. I just remember feeling extremely tired and losing vision. I felt so at peace and relaxed, like it was a dream, and I was ready to pass on, if you will, not caring about what my death would mean to my family and all my friends, and #X200B. Even though it was a severe situation, I've never felt so at peace and calm before in my life, and I honestly can't wait to die just to experience that feeling again. Maybe a little late to the thread, but my dad flatlined with a failing heart. When they brought him back, the doctor asked where he had been. My dad said he was picking blueberries with his long-deceased mother and his sister. 1,000 miles away, that sister woke up in the middle of the night, woke her husband, and said something was wrong with her brother. She had been dreaming that she was picking blueberries with my dad, and their monsieur. I get teary-eyed every time I tell that story. He died a few months later. Miss ya, Dad. I was a passenger in a car driving home from holiday to celebrate my high school graduation, when the car swerved and the driver hit an embankment. The car flew into the air and bounced off the ground 3 times. And I was asleep when it happened. I should have at least been hospitalized. And when ambulances for the driver, police and passers-by stopped, everyone mentioned how it's a miracle that we were alive at all, and #X200B. But when it was happening, I didn't have time to open my eyes before I experienced a violent force I couldn't have imagined. Kinda felt like I was put in a metal box and shaken around. You know, which is what was happening. And my head was so weirdly clear. I just had this intense feeling of like, God no, the car is crashing. This is happening. And I didn't feel any pain. I got banged up significantly. And I had this unbelievably overwhelming feeling that I was not ready to die. I was going to get out of that car. That my life was not over. And it was like my soul just said, no, and #X200B. I'm not exactly religious, but I've always tried to form a relationship with at least my idea of God. And in those incredibly fast, confusing seconds, I'd decay if it was my brain doing what humans' brain do when they freak out. But I really felt like I was talking to God when I thought, not today, thank you, I'm not ready. It was such a peaceful, intense presence, and I've never been the same since. I can't ever forget that feeling like I was not alone. And I really want to believe I'm right about that. And #X200B. Edit. Please wear your seat belts. They save lives. One saved mine. There was absolutely nothing. No light. No memories. Nothing. It was like I didn't exist for about an hour or so. I didn't experience the passing of time either. So the entire time I was dead seemed like an instant. It was sort of like teleporting into the future. I bled to death after a car accident. I went somewhere. I can't say for sure if it was real or just a weird chemical trip in my brain, but the best way I can describe it was like being in a hallway made out of space. It was beautiful and incredibly peaceful. I saw flecks of memories passing by me, but I wasn't focused on them. Monsieur, then a woman's voice that felt like it was everywhere told me I could wake up, and suddenly I was alive again. I nearly drowned in a swimming pool when I was 9 years old. At a hotel, when my family were on a holiday. I remembered it like it was yesterday. At that moment, my legs and arms locked up. My lungs felt like stone. And then I slipped out of consciousness for I'm not sure how long. I woke up to the lifeguard pumping my chest during the time I was unconscious. I was floating, probably because I was in water, in space filled with stars. I tried to swim over to one of the stars and found out they were fragments of my memories. Voices, noises, smell, faces, places, all jumbled together. But a big part of those fragments were my mom, my dad, and my 2 younger brothers and a cousin who was also my best friend. It wasn't like a memory or anything. To put it into words, it was more like a soup of everything I've ever seen, heard, tasted, smell, and feel all there. Then I woke up. I've never seen that vision again, but I still remember it clear as day. Edit. Well, never got 1K likes before. I guess I should elaborate on what the memory fragments looked like. It wasn't too complicated. As a 9-year-old, there aren't that many places I've been to. So the places I associated the people I have a certain level of intimacy with is my home, my classroom, and my cousin's swimming pool at his place's backyard. We hung out a lot, you see. The faces I see were incredibly vivid, but the images were just exactly that. Not real memories, because I've never seen my family member all together yet. We haven't had our family photo taken, in which we did later on the trip. I really wish I could put into words what the images looked like. But I guess the best explanation remains the same. The soup of memories. Sounds like a darn good soup. I had my heart stopped at the hospital because my heart was going 150 BPM for hours. I even had the readout printed out of me flatlining. I had a heart condition and was on acid. My life did not flash before my eyes. It felt like a black cloud spreading through my body. The heart-stopping injection. Which makes no sense. I should note I have over 4 years drug and alcohol-free now. But when it was over, the doctor was walking out of the room, turned to me and said, "Better living through chemistry." Crazy experience, would not recommend. Edit. Yes, the injection was adenosine. I am security guard, and couple years ago guy attacked me in the parking garage and stabbed me. When I was bleeding and losing consciousness, I didn't really saw memories, it was more like memory with better outcome. Sorry about my bad English. Not my first language. I suffocated during surgery due to a series of errors with the nitrous mask and monitors that had been removed and not immediately put back as I was suffocating. I tried to signal. Realized I was under so much nitrous I couldn't move. My ears were ringing. I thought about my husband, and if my daughter would be okay. Cursed the anesthesiologist because one of the nurses said I didn't look good, and he said no one could move until he finished this party. Remember blacking out, then watching from a corner of the OR while everyone was rushing to work on a pink blob. I could see everyone clearly, but one thing was a blob. Realized the blob was me, and they were trying to resuscitate. I intentionally did not go anywhere because I wanted to be there when I was resuscitated so I could be alive again. He just existed in that corner watching the chaos. Then I woke up on the table, bruised but alive. I had a near-death overdose experience at a young age. I remember a black presence came to me, and I knew it was my death. I felt very strongly that it was not my time to go, that I had so much more to do. I tried to kill myself, and while I'm not 100% sure I died, it's hard to verify since I wasn't all there and no one will give me details. All I remember was just being. There was nothing. No light, no forms, no people, and no voice. It was sort of like a state of just understanding and peace. Worst part of it is that I miss the feeling. I have a mental disorder, and I'm sure that's at least 85% of what's talking when I say that. But it was just such a relief to be in that state. I was told I was in the ER for days and no one was sure if I was going to wake up at all. But it lasted for what seemed to be a blink of an eye, but also felt like eternity while I was in it. And #X200B. There was no flash of my life. Nothing but darkness. If you've experienced true dark, as in being in a cave with no visible light, that's the best way that I can describe it. Like that, in a deep sigh after you learn that something horrible didn't happen. That moment when you've sighed out a full breath and there's that single moment of satisfaction. That's what I felt and saw when it happened. Sorry, on mobile etc. My body was completely infected with sepsis. The emergency room staff had placed me in a tub of ice to try and help fight the fever. I had 2 IVs pumping. I don't know what all into me. Next thing I knew, everything was dark. I could feel other people around me. I felt so happy and light. I was free. There was no fear. Somewhere I could hear my best friend yelling at me, "BCH, don't die. I am not raising your children." My mind snapped too. Immediately I knew I had to go back. There was no way I was going to let her near my children. Woke up right afterwards and was amazed at how heavy my limbs felt. I have no fear of dying now. I have raised my kids. and she is no longer my best friend. My life didn't flash before my eyes, but a car definitely did. Lost 2.5 liters of blood in childbirth. Midwives hadn't realized, despite me telling them how unwell I felt and that I was going to be sick. It wasn't until I sort of passed out and remember them saying blood pressure was something over 0. They hit the buzzers. A lot of people came rushing in and I just lying there for what felt like a long time, feeling everything go quiet but wasn't peaceful. Just absolute sadness consumed me that my husband was about to be left without me and that my new son wouldn't have a mummy. A lot of oxygen, drugs and a couple packs of emergency blood transfusion later, and thankfully I was okay. Still very mentally scared by the whole thing. But main moral of the story, please give blood if you can. It's only thanks to the kindness of strangers my baby has a mama, and bleeding out during childbirth is a lot more common than I ever realized. I died briefly due to complications of having leukemia, pneumonia, chickenpox, 108.9 fever and encephalitis. Spelling? At the same time, it was that nothingness in between falling asleep and waking up. I knew nothing happened. I overdosed when I was 14. I gradually transitioned from life into a state of peace and bliss. I felt something. The presence of something wonderful but heavy. Heavy and old and not meant for us mortal folks. I felt that I was on the very brink of entering this place, of finding something great, but I was always just on the edge. It was so long, and so tiring, and I was just waiting to experience this thing. Next thing I know, I'm back to the real world, and I never had the chance to experience the greatness. No, I floated out of my body and looked down on the room. Saw the medical staff trying to revive me and just felt awesome. In a very detached way. I thought, well, my family's gonna be pissed. But physically I just felt like I was floating and very, very content. I remember being excited to see what was next. Then I was revived. I no longer fear death. It was a great experience. I just want to know where my people were. I thought they were supposed to come welcome my ass. Or something. 3 times. Once, I drowned. Did see flashes of memories, but everything was a jumble. I was fighting for my life against the person drowning me, and there came a point where, when telling about this, I tell people that my lizard brain took over. I'm not a violent person, and I guess my brain decided to kick me out while it did what had to be done. I remember floating above myself, looking down and watching myself headbutt and bite at the person who was drowning me. My arms were not free to fight them, and being initially horrified at the sheer animalistic frenzy of what I was doing and how I was acting. Strangely, when it got to this point and my conscience was no longer in charge, I felt very spiritually and emotionally peaceful, if that makes sense. I'm atheist, so interpret that as you will. Another time. First time. Actually, the drowning was about 2 years later. When I was 12 to 13, I hallucinated while I nearly froze to death. 1 minute I was freezing and scared and miserable, and the next, it was a warm sunny day and I was sipping lemonade at a table with other ladies a la Southern Belle. I am from the deep south. The only reason I am alive today is because some part of my brain swam up through the illusion and informed me that something just wasn't right, and then dragged me out of it. I finally found a house nearby and knocked on the door, and the person who opened it literally dropped the breakfast in her hand and screamed, saying I was blue. I imagined I sat there sipping lemonade for quite a while if I had time to turn blue. Another time, as an adult, OBVS, I dated a guy who was into choking. He miscalculated once and darn near strangled me. All that extended flailing around you see on TV is bull garbage. It only took a couple of seconds for me to lose the ability to move or make any kind of indication at all. For the record, though, I felt very peaceful as I started going. No visions, no tunnels or angels or whatever. Just like a slow fade on a movie. I was essentially falling asleep. I think your brain handles death according to your own beliefs and expectations. I consider death to be the end of it all. No afterlife or anything. Just non-existence. Also, I'm not afraid of death. So when my brain thought it was time to do the thing, it started work on presenting me with the eternal dreamless sleep that I expected it to be like. Edit. Regarding the drowning, it was a mentally deficient young lady who tried to drown me. To this day I'm not sure if she was actually psychotic or if she simply thought it was funny and I would be okay later on because I cut off all contact with her entire family afterwards. It wouldn't have been so traumatic if it would have been, say, a big dude who was raging on me because it is expected that some guys are awful people, but no one expects that out of very young people, and for a young girl to be grinning and laughing maniacally. The maniacal part may have been my own life and death interpretation. And trying to drown me, really that, and watching myself basically maul her face, was more traumatic to me than the actual drowning. And yes, she really was trying to drown me. It was no mistake. She basically ambushed me and wrapped her legs around my arms and was literally trying to push me down into the water, until the point that my humanity got jettisoned into the ether. I was telling her to get off me and that I was drowning. Her only reply was to grin and laugh at me. I faded out after watching myself attack her, when I felt so at peace. And when I woke up I was on the shore, covered in my own vomit, and she was off playing with some other kids like nothing happened. Her face was seriously jacked up and she wasn't even fazed by it. In retrospect, my vote goes to psychotic. It's hard to explain. Drowned when I was 3, and was gone about 90 seconds. Dying is a painless experience. Well, there is no pain in your mind. Your body is another story. Best way to describe it. You feel everything and nothing at the same time. You feel free and lost. Being young I didn't have as many memories to see, but I do remember seeing myself pulled out the water. It's hard to explain. There is something beyond death, but it's not what you expect. Check out our NDE and NDERF. https www.nderf.org/archives/exceptional.html. I have had my life flash before my eyes. Twice. On 2 separate occasions. Years apart. I almost fell down some stairs. Different places. Both times my life flashed before me. My whole life. In an instant. I did not die, nor did I nearly die. But they were memorable and unusual experiences. I have been clinical dead twice. Both times during tests in a hospital. No light. No life flashing before my eyes or out-of-body experience. Felt just any other time I lost consciousness. With the sole exception that the disorientation and confusion was much bigger after waking up again. Despite only a few minutes having passed, and being in the same place. If they told me I had been out for weeks, months or even years, I would have believed them in those first few minutes. Also, I really wanted to go pee and kept trying to get up to go to the bathroom, and had to be stopped several times by the doctors and nurses. No, same as a few other comments, it felt like I was falling asleep. I didn't feel much, but I remember it was really dark and I heard echoes of the voices of the people around me. Scary stuff. Not sure if it was a near-death experience, but it did feel like I was dying. I overdosed. I stopped breathing and had no pulse. There is blackness. There is no thought. There's no feelings. There's no past. No future. Just drifting in this blackness. There was no bright light. There was no flashing of my life. Do you remember what it was like before you were born? That's what I feel like it was. It was timeless. I had no knowledge that I had died, but I had no knowledge of it. To her. I do not find death to be scary now. I know that it is a peaceful, timeless place. Or it could have been all the drugs I was on. I'm sober now. By the way, the thing that hurt was waking up when I was maybe 6 or so. My friend and I thought it'd be a good idea to play in our pool without her mom there. I didn't know how to swim and found myself slipping into the deep end. For a while I was panicking and struggling against the water. I held my breath as long as I could and eventually started to breathe in the water, which made me panic more, until eventually I stopped resisting. Eventually this great sense of calm came over me. I remember crapping my pants and not caring. The last thing I remember was looking up and seeing the light dance and refract beautifully against the water with so many colors. Then it just went black. Apparently my friend who could swim got her mom, who did CPR on me long enough for an ambulance to come. My lungs were full enough of water that I was medically drowned. My mom was at the hospital and they were scared that even if I woke up I would have brain damage, but I woke up fine. I told my mom that God has big hands and that I saw Jerry Garcia. I'm not religious at all and wasn't brought up in that sort of background, but I have definitely believed in a higher power since that day. I've kept a picture of Jerry Garcia in my room since high school to watch over me. I was alone at home and choked on a fatty piece of steak I was eating outside. At first I could only get little gulps of air in. Then I tried to take a bigger breath and just lodged the steak further down my windpipe, completely blocking it. I considered throwing myself onto the back of a chair to attempt the Heimlich maneuver but was convinced it wouldn't be successful. I was initially worried about passing out and falling out my wheelchair, so I started pushing myself to a nearby sunbed so I could lie down, but then realized since I wasn't breathing it was probably going to be the end. I remember thinking something like, wow, so this is how I die. I didn't expect it to be this soon. I have contemplated suicide quite a lot. Fortunately the steak dislodged itself, possibly from the motion of me pushing the wheelchair, maybe helped by some slimy throat saliva or something. The whole experience lasted about 45 to 60 seconds, but really freaked me out, and I still don't really know what to make of it several months later. I didn't get close to death but was definitely sure that I was about to die. So it was more of a psychological mind fluff than a physical or near-death experience. I eat a lot of steak, but now take smaller mouthfuls, chew more, and avoid big fatty pieces. My dog is grateful, I'm sure, and my feelings about suicide are a bit different. I think I'm more scared of death than before, even though I remained quite calm during my experience. I think the most scary thing is that it can really happen at any time. Even when you're just relaxing at home, enjoying a steak and the view. I had a grand mal seizure. From what I was told, I stopped breathing, got CPR, came to thinking I was just sleeping, no recollection of it. I came back discombobulated, confused, thrashing around with the EMTs. I got to the hospital and was placed on a crash cart. Had multiple EKGs. I honestly thought I was going to die. But to be honest, nothing flashed before my eyes. When you die, it's like that period of time between when you fall asleep and when you wake up that you can't remember when you wake up. Especially if you don't remember even having a dream that is death. You fall asleep. You just never wake up. I had a friend who tried to end her life. She told me when they brought her back to life it felt like electric lava running throughout her veins. She didn't see any light, no life flashing before her eyes. It was nothingness. The way I explained it above is the best way I can explain it. I drowned and was brought back with CPR. All I remember from it was that it was a quiet experience and dark. Everything just faded to black. I put "brought back" in quotes because you don't perform CPR on the truly dead. It can preserve life, but it cannot restore it. I had no pulse, but the CPR was begun before my system completely lost oxygenation. It's at that point you're considered dead.